Okay, guys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and we are welcoming everybody to this Zoom session. It is now 2 minutes past 8 o'clock, so I think we left enough time for the latecomers to join in, and we can start now. So, welcome everybody to this live Zoom session hosted by the Galilee Marathon Swimming Association. My name is Guy Cohen. With me is Kfir Pravda, and he will be your host. We will both be your hosts tonight. We welcome renowned open water swimmer Lynne Cox to our event. Lynne holds over 50 firsts and world records and is a New York Times best-selling author and motivational speaker. Today, she will share much of her background and experiences, and our session will include also a Q&A portion at the end. So if anybody has a question, save it to the end, and we will give you the opportunity to talk and ask your questions.
So Lynne's remarkable story was beautifully written and published in her book, Swimming to Antarctica, Tales of a Long Distance Swimmer. I have to admit, I've read this book several times, and personally, it impacted a lot of my decisions regarding my adventures in open water. So thank you for that. When even my wife knows your name. It's a must-read book for ocean swimming lovers and other big dreamers alike. So how are you doing, Lynne? How are you this afternoon, morning for you?
It's morning for me, and I'm doing great. I was able to go for a swim this morning, and I'll be able to get back in later on this afternoon. So life is good.
So thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for spending the time with us and sharing your stories with us.
I'm happy to do this. This is really fun.
Okay, before we start, we have another short announcement to make. And Lynne is offering a virtual book plate to all participants in our session today. These are personalized labels that Lynne will create for each person and email it to us directly so that we can then print it and stick it on the cover of Lynne's books. This is something special that Lynne is offering our group tonight or today. So you may send your full name and email address to the email of the Galilee Marathon Swimming Association. If you look down in the chat, we wrote down the email address of the association. So anyone who wants to receive the virtual book plate from Lynne, please send us your contact details, and we will send Lynne the full list then. So we can now start. we finally finished all the preparation. Lynne, why don't you please give us a short introduction about yourself?
Okay, so I grew up on the East Coast of the United States and started training when I was about 9 years old. Swam with the Manchester swim team and did competitive swimming. I was not really fast and I didn't do really well, but I have an older brother and 2 younger sisters, and they were good swimmers. So my parents said, hey, why don't we move you to California and we will have you train with the Olympic coach, because my parents saw that we had potential. So we started training at the Belmont Plaza pool in 1968 with a coach named Don Gambrell, who would become the coach of 4 U.S. Olympic teams. And I swam with the age group teams. I did okay, but I really was bored because, you'd swim a mile in a pool and it was 66 laps. And at the end of it, you'd get 10 seconds rest and you'd go again. And I really wanted to do well because I was swimming in this pool with some of the best swimmers in the world. We were so lucky because the coach had a great team, but he also brought in swimmers from everywhere, from Sweden and Germany and all over Europe and South America. And so they were training under him as well as us. So to see these swimmers excel and train hard, I wanted to be like them, but there was no distance really long enough. And so I was so fortunate because Don Gambrell recognized that I had an endurance ability and suggested that I swim an open water swim off the coast of California. So I did that when I was 14 years old. and I won the women's division and came in third in the men's, and decided that this is really great. I can actually do well at it. And it's fun because you don't have to go back and forth 66 times to do a mile. You can just go one lap and do a mile. So you don't have to remember what lap you're on. You know, it's one lap is a mile, or one lap is 5 miles, or 10 kilometers, or whatever you're swimming. So I started training with a group of kids for Catalina, which is a swim between California, mainland California, and an island offshore. And they've been training for a few years. They trained in the ocean, and I never had trained in the ocean. But I started training with them and found out that I was very quick and I could keep up with them. And I wound up swimming the Catalina Channel with them, which was 21 miles, which I think is probably around 30 kilometers.
Yes, something like that. Yes,
something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but actually we swam an extra probably 15 kilometers because of the currents. And it took us 12 hours and 36 minutes. So that was really what got me started. That realizing that, you know, this is something that I really enjoy doing. It's so hard, but you feel like you've really accomplished something when you finish. So I asked my parents the next day, I'd like to train for the English Channel, and I'd like to try to set the world record, and will you support me on that? And so they said yes, because that's the way my parents were. And we talked to Don Gambrel, and he said that he would help coach me. And so he was really great because he was able to take the training that he was using for the Olympic athletes and adapt it to open water swimming. And so,
remind us again, how old were you swimming Catalina and then making up your mind to swim the English Channel?
I was 14 when I swam Catalina, and then I was 14 when I started training for the English Channel. So I set the goal pretty early to try to swim the English Channel, because at that time, most people were in their 30s or 40s that swam the English Channel. So it was really unusual for somebody that was 15 years old and a girl to want to swim the English Channel at that age. But also my goal really was to break the world record. And so I started training really hard for that.
Okay, so as our group includes many swimmers with only limited experience in the open water, can you give us some background on how you trained for and planned your swims? How do you also prioritize safety?
So one of the things that I was really fortunate from the very start was that when I was training for the English Channel, my mom or my dad would walk the beach with me. So I'd swim just outside the wave break in the ocean, and I would swim anywhere from I forgot the kilometer distance, but I'm going to have somebody look it up for me, the distance. But I train 5 miles, which I don't know what that converts to kilometers, 5 to 10 miles a day, and sometimes 15 miles. 8 kilometers to
16.
16. Thank you very much.
Minus.
Sorry,
That's
16.
easy.
And
10 miles.
then, I'm sorry.
10 miles is easy. That's 16. That's easy.
10 miles, thank you. And I should have remembered it, but I just forgot. So I would train sometimes beyond that. But what I was really lucky about was that my mom or my dad would walk the beach with me and maintain a certain pace. So no matter if I had the current with me, I'd stay with him. And if I had the current against me, then I had to struggle to stay with him. And what that taught me was how to feel the water and how to adjust my speed. Even if it was just a little bit of a current against me, I would feel it and I would realize I needed to pick up my pace. And if it was a really strong current, I would realize I still needed to pick up my pace more. So that helped me a lot. And then I was around a lot of lifeguards who were really watching over me while I swam, but they were the ones that told me stuff like, you know, when you enter the water, always make sure if you're going to dive into the water, your hands are out in front of your head so that you don't hit something and hurt your head or break your neck. they would tell me that I needed in California and along the coast here, and also Mexico and in different parts of the United States, there are stingrays. So you learn when you're getting into the water to shuffle your feet, to slide your feet so that you don't step on them. But I also heard from a friend that you need to do that when you come into shore as well. So when I come swimming into shore, I'll splash a lot, then I'll step down carefully, and then I'll shuffle my feet coming in. So I learned a lot from the people around me that were experts, but through the years, I spent pretty much 2 years off and on a few years ago working with the Navy SEALs, because I was writing an open water swimming manual, and I wanted to find out how they went about risk management, how they were able to diminish risks so that they didn't have to worry about a bunch of stuff when they were carrying out a mission. So I learned things from them that made me figure out how to swim safer. So things like, I was just talking to a friend in San Francisco last week, and he was swimming at a new beach, and he was swimming with friends, and it was very rough. And he said, you know, I'm thinking about wearing fins, but I feel kind of embarrassed because, you know, people at the club make fun of us if we wear fins. So I said, hey, if it's about your safety and you're getting caught in a riptide or in a whirlpool, it makes total sense to have your fins on to make sure you're safe. And I said, okay, that's great, but you know where you're going to come out. But what happens if the currents around the Golden Gates get so strong that you can't get back in, or you can't get to the beach? Do you have a B plan and a C plan? Do you have, like, do people each morning get together or afternoon know that they're going to have an alternative to go to? And he said, no, we haven't talked about that. And I said, well, I think that before you get into the water, you talk to your pod, your group of swimmers, and you say, we're going to swim to that point, but if somebody can't make it, then you stop at that beach and we'll meet you afterwards. Or we're going to go to a beach further up there, and that's where we're all going to land if we can't land at the first beach. So I think people often just think of one objective, but I think that to be a smart swimmer, you have to have a plan ahead of time, but also have the adjustments, just even in training. I mean, one of the things that impressed me so much with the Navy SEALs was that they wound up having an ambulance right on the beach. They had walkie-talkies. They had people setting up the whole swim site before they even got in and trained. And so I thought, wow, they train like they actually perform. And so I can learn from that. And I think that when you go into the open water, it is like going into a different world. And in a way, it's a water jungle. And you have to be able to adapt and adjust, but you also have to have the plan in advance, I think. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I was telling my non-swimming friends, I have like a bunch of those, not that many, but when I talking with my non-swimming friends, I was telling them, hey, you know, I'm going to have this live session with Lynne Cox. And tell me, so who is Lynne Cox? And I was telling them, well, you know, she did all those crazy things in swimming, and I told them all about your story. But then I was trying to figure out how to best position you, let's put it this way, and to find the right way to tell your sentence. And so we were wondering, how do you define yourself? When people ask you about yourself, do you call yourself, hi, I'm Lynne Cox, I'm a long distance swimmer, or I'm an adventurer, or hey, I'm a storyteller and motivator, and usually it comes with a business card. I mean, how does it work for you? How do you see yourself in that aspect?
Actually, I first see myself now as an author, and then a motivational speaker and a swimmer. I think that I've evolved through time. First, I was doing these swims that were all about breaking world records, and then they became swims that were about opening borders. And I think from there, I wanted to share these stories about these connections with people around the world. So that's really why I became an author, to be able to tell the stories well. But I've also realized that the stories in books are kind of limited, that you reach a small audience that way. But if you can go out and speak, then the stories become accessible to wider audiences. So I think I'd say I'm all of those, but hopefully I'm more than that. And I have friends like you that are swimmers, but also friends that are not swimmers. And I think that that's good too, because sometimes you get a very narrow perspective. Although it's really wonderful to know that you have swimming friends, and no matter what, your swimming friends are your friends and you depend on each other. There's something very special.
I have a 9-year-old daughter. And when I read your book, I was thinking, you crossed the Catalina at the age of 14, right?
Right.
And then the English Channel at the age of?
15 and 16.
15 and 16. I mean, usually girls and boys at that age have different type of hobbies. How did you, how did you push yourself to do that? And those, in this age, the bands that you like at this time, these are the bands you will forever listen to. How does those experiences impacted the rest of you?
I think that I was, when you have a family that's really supportive, and my family was, and my dad wanted to make sure that all of us stayed healthy. So he felt that swimming was really a great sport, and my mom swam, and her father was a physician, a doctor, and he was a swimmer. So it was something that we did as a family, and it's something that was fun. So my parents wanted, though, to give us something to look forward to instead of just swimming as a hobby. They thought that maybe we would enjoy doing the competitive swimming, and we did. But I think that for me, it was really limiting to have to stay in a swimming pool, that I really got tired of going back and forth. And I also got really overheated because I would train really hard. But I think that what happened really was that once I started doing those open water swims and found that I could be good at it, I enjoyed it a lot more. To be a mediocre swimmer in the pool because I wasn't fast. I wasn't a sprinter, but then to take that training of being a strong athlete and then being able to go long distances, that opened a new world to me. My friends in high school and in college, a lot of them were not swimmers, and they didn't really understand. They admired the commitment, but they sometimes didn't understand why I was so focused. But I think that to do anything well, you have to be really focused, and you have to set other things aside to be able to do the things you want to do. And I felt that way in college too, but I don't know if you feel this within your swimming community, but for me, when I went away to college for university, basically, having the group of swimmers there and water polo players were my constant friends. And so if I ever needed to figure out what to study or who to teach, who to go to for a professor, they were the ones that really helped me figure things out. And I felt so fortunate to have that group of friends that were with me.
And okay, so I mean, now you're after your youth period, and you're already in college, and you've done all these amazing things that people do in a lifetime, usually, and you reached, I think, the goals of your life in that sense. How did you motivate yourself and set new targets, and just kept going? What motivated you to keep looking for these new challenges and dreams?
That's a great question, because sometimes you can have a great goal. It might be your first miles, or your first kilometer swim, or your first 10-kilometer swim, and then you do it, and then you think, okay, I did it, now what? And so I had that happen where I swam the English Channel the first time, and then I thought, I have achieved my biggest goal in life at age 15. Now what do I do? I was really lucky because there was a man from Massachusetts who broke the men's record, but he broke my time too, the way I looked at it. So I went back the following year and with the idea of breaking his time, and I did. but it was really tough because the currents were stronger the second time, and I swam a lot further, but I swam 20 minutes faster. Okay. And then I came back after the English Channel again going, now what? And so I decided, well, I did Catalina when I was 14. Maybe I could go back and break the world record for that. But at that point, my brother held the record from the island to the mainland. And I decided I didn't want to try to break his time. So I swam from the mainland to the island and broke the overall record, which was the fastest time. And then I realized that you can spend your life swimming the English Channel over and over again, and you can spend your life swimming Catalina over and over again. And it's different each time, and it's interesting, but I decided I wanted to do things that had never been done. And that is where everything became super exciting. Because when you say, okay, I want to try to be the first person to swim the Strait of Magellan, people kind of look at you like, you can't do that. That's impossible. The water's 4 or 5 degrees C. The water's so rough, it takes down ships that causes them to sink. So how could you even imagine doing that? But I did. And that, just imagining something impossible and trying to figure out how you can make it possible is so exciting. And trying to find people that know about the water in the Strait of Magellan and how to navigate and piecing these puzzles together and figuring out the course and the time and the day and all that is something that's really fun and scary. But it's, for me, that's what makes open water swimming so great.
So can you tell us about some of these challenges, like the Magellan Straits, or what else, and what is so scary and exciting about these swims that you've done? And this is before the Bering Straits.
This is way before. So the Strait of Magellan I did when I was 17 years old, and the research that I'd done, well, if you look at the map, there's on one side, on the west coast is the Pacific Ocean, on the east coast is the Atlantic Ocean, and the water flows through the Strait of Magellan. And the water, when the tide changes, it's like if you've taken a hose and you bent it, and then you let the pressure build up and then you release it. That's what the tidal changes in, like the Strait of Magellan. You just have this huge current that rips through the hose. And so if you time it right, you can get across. But we didn't know that because nobody had ever done it. So we tried to figure out a place where I could start to swim, where it would be safe to start. And it was on the island of Tierra del Fuego. So I started south of the Strait of Magellan and swam across to the mainland of Chile. The thing that made that really interesting, exciting, and things that we didn't expect is that I got on shore with a support boat right offshore, and then a main huge ship out in the strait that was a Navy ship that was waiting for us. And just before I got into the water, it started snowing. It was just weird to be thinking, oh my gosh, it's swiming, I'm swimming in the snow. And then as I started that swim, the winds kicked up and they were constantly 25, 35, up to 45 knots. And that, as you know, when you're swimming in rough water, it makes it really difficult to breathe. So I had to change my breathing pattern and breathe only on one side. We got almost at the finish of the swim. It was a very short swim, but the water temperature was 4 or 5 degrees. And that for me was the coldest I'd ever swum in. We got about 400 meters offshore and the current started changing really fast. And there were whirlpools, huge whirlpools that were occurring in the direction that we were heading. And there was a person on board the boat that was ordered to hold a certain course. And he was heading right toward that whirlpool. And my advisor, he wasn't my coach, but my advisor, John, was telling him he needed to change course. And the captain of the small boat wouldn't listen to him. So finally, John was able to radio the captain on the ship, the captain of the Chilean Navy, and give him the radio when they changed course. in the meantime, I had gone off to the other side, and I had a group of men that were the Chilean Navy SEALs that were beside me, and they were guiding me into shore. So it was a really wild and exciting swim, but we had people around me that knew what to do, and the SEALs had been ordered to stay with me throughout the swim. So I made it safely, and the small boat with the captain and my friend John made it safely as well. But so much of it is about making sure that your team in advance knows the plan and can make adjustments. And the problem we learned from that one was that the captain needed to tell the captain of the small boat to make adjustments. Don't just hold that one heading. So we learn things as we go. And it's fun now when people are trying to do different swims and they get in touch with me and they want some advice. I will tell them stuff that I've learned so that they don't have to make the same mistakes that I made.
Oh yes, it's all about not making the same mistakes. And I think, I read the book, and I must say once again, like Kfir mentioned before, it's a fascinating, it's a thriller. Every swim that you describe during, while reading through this book, every swim is a new, exciting adventure, and everything has a special new thing to it. And when you think of that, all these things happen to you, like you did these first thing, the first one in the world, and there's no one to learn from. And this is just an amazing book. And I really, once again, you have to read the book. All those.
Well,
It's so exciting. We don't have enough time to tell all the stories here during this.
Right, but I think the thing for your new swimmers in the Sea of Galilee is that for me, these were swims that I had trained for and worked toward, but I still remember, that first 5-mile swim or the first 5-kilometer swim where it was just this adventure because I'd never done it before. And I think that's just as valuable as doing a first channel swim. I think that having that experience of setting a big goal, of training for it, and then having all sorts of experiences along the way with friends, learning what works with you when you feed, learning what doesn't work for you, learning how to set your pace, learning how it's fun to swim with others that may be faster than you, or how you can swim slower to support another swimmer. I have a friend right now who his dad raced against Johnny Weissmuller, who was this very famous, you may probably know, but he played in the Tarzan movies, but he had won the Olympic Games, and his dad got number 2 to him in the Olympic Games. And so the son, who's now in his mid-70s, was out there this morning kayaking with me because he hasn't been able to swim since January, so he's not in great shape. So he was just kayaking with me, and it was just so nice to have him kayaking with me and to know that we'll be swimming together soon. And when you swim together, you share more than just swimming together, just what's going on in your day and your life.
So you had Weissmuller kayaking for you this morning.
Johnny Weissmuller raced against my friend Jim Brown's father. So Johnny, Weissmuller got number 1, and then
and he got number 2, his father.
He got number 2, and then this was in 1931. I just heard this yesterday. I didn't even know this about him, but this was in 1931, and then the Depression happened, and then his dad couldn't swim anymore. Right, but it turns out that the son swam for Stanford, which is an amazing university that has a fantastic swimming team. Right. So he's 75 years old now, and he's swimming when he can every day, but he's not used to the cold bay, the cold ocean anymore. Okay. So yesterday we got in the water together for about 20 minutes. And today we'll get in this afternoon for about half an hour. And gradually he'll get back into the ocean and find comfort there.
Lynne, tell us about the Bering Strait swim.
The Bering Strait swim was, I think, one of the most challenging swims I ever did. And it was also one of the most important swims that I ever did. It was a swim that my dad had suggested at a time during the height of the Cold War in 1976. He said, you know, if you look at a map of the world, there's Little Diomede, which is the United States, and there's Big Diomede, which is at that time the Soviet Union, now Russia. And in the middle of the Bering Strait are these two islands. On the shore is Alaska, the United States, and on the shore over here is Siberia, Russia. So the United States, Little Diomede, and Big Diomede are two islands that are only 2.7 miles apart. So 6 or 7 kilometers apart, maybe. So the international date line runs between the two of them, and that's also the border. So my dad said, you know, people don't look at the map this way, but if you look closely, you realize that the superpowers are not Washington, D.C. and Moscow. It's Little Diomede, the United States, and Big Diomede, the Soviet Union, and they're only 6 kilometers apart. So maybe there's a way for you to swim across there and open the border. So at first I thought, you know, how can you swim in water that is that cold? So my dad said, well, how cold is that cold? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, maybe you could do some research to find out what the water temperature is. So I started being intrigued by it and started thinking, well, who do you write to find out the water temperature in the Bering Strait? I mean, this is the way I started every project of how do you even begin? So I started thinking, okay, maybe the Alaska Fish and Game might know. Maybe the state senator from Alaska might know who to contact. So I started sending letters out, and ultimately it was the Alaska Fish and Game who wrote to me and said, in the summertime, the water temperature is 2 to 3 degrees centigrade. So I thought, you know, that's really cool. You know, how can you even swim in water that cold? It seems impossible. But my dad said, well, you swim in the wintertime off California and it's 8 or 9 degrees. So maybe there's a way that you can acclimate to colder water temperatures. So instead of saying, no, it's not possible, no, you can't do it, no, don't think of it, it's more like, well, think of how you can do it. So that sort of became my mantra instead of why it can't be done. So I spent 11 years trying to figure it out, and 11 years of writing letters, because the other big part of this was that the United States, Little Diomede, is an island where there are about 150 Inuit, Eskimos, but now called Inuit, people who live on the island. On Big Diomede, there had been family members that had lived there, but when I wanted to do the swim, all the family had been moved off, and it was a spy satellite, a Soviet spy satellite where they had military stationed. So nobody was allowed to land there. So for those 11 years, I was writing letters to the Soviet Foreign Ministry, the Soviet Ambassador to the United States, the US Ambassador to the Soviet Union, state senators, congressmen, people that had done work in the Soviet Union. I wrote to Vladimir Horowitz, a very famous musician, because he was Russian and he played in Russia, and I was trying to get help from him. I was writing to the people that were involved in the Soyuz mission in space, because I felt like maybe through NASA I could make contacts. I mean, it was crazy. The amount of, every day I was writing a letter or trying to figure out who else to write to. And finally, after 11 years, I got permission to do the swim. It was amazing. It was also unbelievable in a way, though, because I had a group of press people with me, and I had a group of doctors with me. 2 doctors. One was from the University of Alaska, Dr. William Keating, who was the world's expert on hypothermia, and Dr. Jan Nybor, who was from Alaska, and he was an eye physician, but he had spent years hiking and backpacking and living in Alaska. So he had volunteered to come along and help out, as well as his father, who was a professor at the University of Chicago and a physician. So I had those three doctors as my medical support team. And then I had the press, and then I had other people that were the Inuit, and then a few friends that were there to help me organize the swim. So
can you jump over to the swim itself? And what I remember from jumping into the water, what I remember reading, I mean, there were no iPhones at the time. You couldn't communicate, you know, freely between the two nations. And I think, if I'm not correct, you wrote you were not actually sure that the Russians are going to wait for you on the other side when you jumped into
Right. That's exactly what was going on. The Moscow was 13 time zones away from Big Diomede, and they call it Ostrorotmanova in Russian. But so for us to communicate with Moscow was really impossible, because when I would be doing the swim would be the middle of the night and nobody was answering the phone. And we couldn't communicate directly with the Soviet military that had sent people to meet us, but we didn't know exactly where or when. We were supposed to meet them halfway across the Bering Strait, but the fog came in and the visibility was less than 100 meters. So we couldn't see anything in front of us. So I jumped in the water and started to swim. And actually the other thing was that early in the morning, it had been sunny and beautiful, and you could clearly see Big Diomede Island. There was no problem. But the problem was that the people that were going to support my swim had been up all night long partying, because they were celebrating, because they were going to be able to go to Big Diomede Island. So they had all overslept. So I was ready to go at 6 or 7 in the morning and nobody was awake. And I was getting really anxious because I wanted to start the swim. So by the time we actually started the swim, the fog had come in and you couldn't see anything. And I mean, you could see 100 meters at the most. So I started swimming. The water temperature at that point was about 7 or 8 degrees. And then it dropped very rapidly to 3 or 4. I got about halfway across. My crew was in umiaks. They're long walrus skin boats. And then the 2 doctors were in a Zodiac boat beside me. And Dr. Keating had brought a thermal pill, which was a pill that I swallowed, and it was able to send out a transmitter to be able to have them hold a receiver near my stomach and find out what my core temperature was. Theoretically, it was what was going to work, but actually it didn't work because the signal dissipated in the salt water. Since then, I found out from the Navy SEALs that they have figured out something else that actually works, but they wouldn't tell me what it is because it's a secret. But anyway, they monitored me through the swim, and then we got to about 100 meters from Big Diomede Island, and there was nobody there. But I was all set to go into shore because my fingers were turning white and I was really cold and I just wanted to finish. And then we heard in the distance this man shouting his name and telling us that he was a reporter from TASS newspaper and that he was with the Soviet Welcoming Committee. But where I was landing were cliffs. And instead of landing where the cliffs were, could I swim another mile, another 3 kilometers south along shore to land on a snowbank where the Welcoming Committee was waiting for us, because they couldn't come to us, could we go to them? And so, you know, those moments when you think, oh my gosh, I just want to be done now. I'm really cold, I'm really tired, I just want to finish. That sort of goes through your head. But the swim had really been about reaching out and connecting with the Soviets and opening the border. So we swam, or I swam with my crew parallel to the shore with the Soviet boat guiding us, and landed on shore about, I don't know, 20 minutes later. And it was fantastic because I reached up and I was trying to climb out on the snowbank, and I was getting onto my knees, but I couldn't get out because it was all icy. So I had two Soviet soldiers just grabbing my arms and lifting me up onto the snowbank. And I just thought, this is so amazing, because you could feel the warmth of their hands on my skin. And to grow up, you know, with this threat of the Soviets and fear of the Cold War and nuclear stuff, and to see these people as human beings who have been cheering me on. I found out for the last 3 days they'd been on the island waiting for us, and they kept thinking that I was going to swim across on my own for some reason. And so they'd see seals popping up and they think that it was me swimming over. And so they were so happy that the swim had finished there and that they were there to greet us.
Amazing.
And it was fantastic because the people that came in the walrus-skin boats were Inuit, and their family members had lost touch with the family members that had lived on Big Diomede Island. But there were two doctors that the Soviets had brought with them who were Inuit, and they were part of the same family. So they were able to talk to each other and find out what had happened to their families over the last 48 years. And so then the people from Little Diomede Island started singing an old folk song, and the two Siberian doctors that were Inuit started singing along with them. And then by shortwave radio, they had all the people on Little Diomede Island singing along together. So it was fantastic to see this connection, not just between the US and Soviet Union, but these families that had lost touch became together again.
But about the connection between the Soviet Union and the US, I think this was later mentioned by President Reagan and Chairman Gorbachev. Was it? When was that? When did that happen?
3 months later, when President Reagan and Secretary General Gorbachev were signing the INF Missile Treaty, Secretary General Gorbachev stood up and said, it took a daring American woman by the name of Lynne Cox just 2 hours to swim between our two countries. And he said something like, it showed how close to each other the two countries are and how the relations between the two countries are improving. And then after that, President Reagan toasted him, and then they signed the missile treaty about diminishing the amount of nuclear arms that they had, intermediate missiles that they had and that we had. And it was amazing because I didn't expect that to happen at all. But, you know, it's interesting how, as athletes, we all know that that tends to break down borders, that we figure out how to do things together. And hopefully that inspires other change to occur in a good way.
Which is an amazing thing, how you bring swimming into connecting people and tearing down the borders between the countries, which is an amazing, you know, idea, and it's something really to look up. And
Thank you, Guy. I think, though, that what you learn is when you want to do a swim, if you can find local people that will help you, then from the very start, the swim becomes so much more than you or me as a swimmer doing it. It's suddenly you have people that are sharing their knowledge with you and their experience, and it becomes their swim too. And then they get excited about it. So that sort of just keeps spilling over. So the things that I've done, I never could have done if I hadn't been able to find local people that were willing to help me out. And when you succeed, you do it, even though it's an individual sport, you do it with them and they feel that success too. So, I mean, when we finished the Bering Strait swim, everyone was so happy, so excited. I mean, and then, you know, it was such a big deal because the border was open for the first time in 48 years. And as a result, there was an international park that was created north of there between the US and Soviet Union. And the Inuit from both countries were able to go back and forth without passports, and fishing rights changed, and Alaska Airlines was suddenly able to fly from Alaska directly across to Vladivostok. So I think that, you know, when you're trying to do something like you light a candle, that candle can light so many others. And I think that's what we do as athletes, not just in big swims, but just by showing other people that, you know, this is something that makes us happy. Maybe you can join us, or maybe you can do something you love with your friends too. I think that that's the example that we set.
I think that.
Thank you very much.
Today we have so many interesting polarized society. So I hope that we can use the same tools that you've used between different nations within our countries as well. I can tell you that we have something like additional 70,000 questions, but we want to let others ask as well. But before that, I just wanted to ask you two questions. First of all, when I've asked you, how do you see yourself? You said, I'm an author. So it will be great to learn more about the books that you've written. And I've also heard that there is a new book coming out.
Wow, you get all the news, didn't you? So yeah, so so very quickly, my first book was Swimming to Antarctica, and that was about all the different swims, not all of them, but the big adventures, the ones that I really learned something from, and I wrote about because I hope somebody else would want to read it and have that help them with whatever swim they wanted to do, and just that experience of the adventure. The second book I wrote was a book called Grayson, and it was about a baby whale that got lost off the shores of California. And I wound up spending about 5 hours in the water helping him find his mother, along with fishermen and lifeguards and all that. But it's a very happy story. Then I wrote a book called South with the Sun, and it was about Roald Amundsen, who was a Norwegian explorer, who was the first man to reach the South Pole and get back safely. I was a history major at university, and I was intrigued with him because he succeeded when others failed. So I wanted to see, how did he do it? And there were things that were so interesting to me because he was training to be able to go to the Antarctic in temperatures that were minus 40 degrees centigrade. And so he was sleeping at night with his windows open in Norway. And I remember I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm sleeping in California with my windows open to try to acclimate. The temperature differences are huge, but many of the things that he used to help him succeed were things that I had used. But I also learned a lot more from reading about his journey through his letters and journals, and a friend translated them for me. Then I wrote an open water swimming manual because all of these years I've had many, many questions, and I just thought, I'll write a book and put all that information in the book, and I'll work with the Navy SEALs to learn from them. And then that way it'll help beginning swimmers in the open water, advanced swimmers, and then people that want to do something that's never been done. And then I wrote a children's book about an elephant seal in New Zealand that I heard about when I was there, about this elephant seal that decided to live in Christchurch, New Zealand. And the people there absolutely love this elephant seal. And Elizabeth became part of the community. But then there were some things that happened and things changed, but no matter what, she stayed as part of the community. Then I wrote another book called Swimming in the Sink. And that was my most recent book to date. And that was a story about taking care of my very loving folks, my parents. They both got very ill for a long, long period of time and passed away. And because of the stress of it, I got extremely sick and almost died, and had to spend a year recovering, and then eventually found my way back into the water. And so now there are a lot of people that have been reading that book because they're finding with the virus in isolation in the United States, they haven't been able to do the things that they've loved. And they've had to sort of sacrifice a lot of stuff. So they've read that book as a way to get through a difficult time and get back into the water. So that was a hard book to write, but I think it was worthwhile. And now I'm on my 7th book, and it's at a point where it just reached the editor, and I'm not even sure yet what the title of the book is going to be, because every time I've given the editor the title of the book, she's wanted to change it. But I'm able to come back and say, this is the title I'd like. So we'll see what the title is, and we'll see how much editing I have to do. Usually it takes anywhere from 9 months to a year before it will be published. So it's a process. It's like training for an ocean swim. It takes time. So.
Okay, so we will be eagerly waiting to hear when it's published, and I can bet that we will run to the shops and get it once it's there.
Thanks, Kai. Thank you.
I'd like to open up now the session to any questions from the audience. And if anybody would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself and say your name and then ask the question, and perhaps you can relate to those questions. Does anyone want to ask a question now?
Lynn, I'll ask you. It's Rhonda.
Hi, Rhonda.
I just wanted to say hi. I am your sister's Gator Gal water polo mate.
Oh, I love it.
From San Antonio, Texas.
Yes.
And we played there, and you came to our game in Irvine, California, and watched us play.
Yes, I remember. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was a while ago. Anyway, so I live in Israel and started open water swimming maybe 6 years ago. And I was frightened for like 2 years, shaking in my boots every time I would go in. But I love it. It's so much fun. So just wanted to say hi.
Thank you. Thank you. So nice to say hi to you. And it seems like the Sea of Galilee is a perfect place to train, except for the heat.
Yeah, well, I'm trained. We swim in the Mediterranean, actually, because we live in Haifa on the sea.
Oh, right. So the only thing that you really have to worry about there might be the jellyfish.
Yeah, you look, you try to go around them. Most of the time, it's okay.
Most of the time, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to somebody long ago who was swimming off Haifa, and he was saying he kept getting stung. And so I remember that in Australia they had what we call stinger suits, and they're like long sleeve swimsuits and long legged swimsuits. And so he was going to try those out. And then I said, but it's so hot and sunny there. Maybe somebody will be smart and make them out of a light colored material.
Yeah.
And then turn the seam inside out so it doesn't chafe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so it's great that you're swimming there.
Yeah. So, and I also read your book, of course. Somebody gave it to me as a birthday present, your first one, many years ago. Yeah. Say hi to your sister for me, okay? I tried to reach her, but I couldn't reach her. So anyway, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Have fun.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah.
Fabrice, you're on. Fabrice?
Okay. Lynne, hi, and thank you so much for sharing these experiences with us. It's really fascinating. I wanted to ask you, what is the emotion that you feel in the instant that you're in that water, challenging yourself, pushing yourself to the limit? Can you describe this instant, this moment? What do you feel? And then when you have to push even harder, where do you go deep, dig for the energy to push even more?
Those are fantastic questions. I think that, each swim is different, each feeling is different, but often when I'm really, really tired or I really have to start digging, I think about how much effort it took to get there. For me, I look at a channel swim or a big swim as a mountain, and all the training, all the letters you've written, all the money you've saved or put away, or sponsors you've gotten. Usually it's me funding myself, or trying to piece it together. I think of those things and the effort that it's taken to get to that moment. And so often, like when I was jumping in to swim in Antarctica, the water there's 0 degrees. And part of me was so scared because I could go into cardiac arrest when I hit the water. But the other part of me was so excited because I was thinking, oh my gosh, at last, finally I get to jump in and start swimming. it's taken me all this time and now I finally get to do it. And the only way I can equate that is I used to play piano, and I remember playing scales and I wasn't a great pianist at all, but finally getting to a point where I could play a piece of music and think, and it sounded good, and think, oh my gosh, at last I can do this. So that's the emotion of gratitude and relief and excitement. But then later on during a swim, when I'm digging deep, I'm often thinking about, you just got to put in a little bit more effort now because it's taken you so much to get here. And remember that, and remember the people that helped you get to that point. And then sometimes, you swim through that point and you feel better and you think, why was I even not feeling good? And then sometimes you get stuck. And so that's when I think it's really good to have people on a boat or in a kayak. And sometimes you just need to take a drink of liquid or eat a cookie or something. And that just helps you get energy into you to get you going again.
Yeah, that's great. If I can add one comment. It so happens that I'm also a musician and a swimmer.
I love it.
I would say that for me, the emotion comes from the immersion of our senses. And I find that when I swim, as well as when I play music, my brain and my body is totally immersed in the moment. And I feel that very strongly. But thank you, Lynne.
Thank you. That's wonderful. That's beautiful.
Anybody else, please?
Yeah, I have a question.
Who is that?
Zvika, can you see me?
Zvika.
Yes.
One moment. Yeah, hi. I'm in the car.
Go ahead. Ask the question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Zvika. I'm also an open water swimmer. I wanted to ask, how much do you train along the week? How does your training week looks like? I mean, these days.
These days, I swim because I love it. So I'm swimming anywhere from, actually it's 1 to 2 hours a day, but because I have friends now that are trying to get back into the water, I'm swimming from 1 to 3 or 3.5 hours a day. But it's not regimented, it's not hard, it's more, I get up in the morning and I go for a swim. And I just enjoy being in the water. And it's sort of the way I started this whole thing of just enjoying being in the water.
And open water swimming, always, every morning.
Open water swimming, always. I think that it's really good to do pool swimming to help you build a pace and to look at your time and to be able to keep that going. But for me, I would just rather swim in the open water. And instead of swimming back and forth in a pool, I now will use landmarks. I'll swim and go, okay, that's a half a kilometer there. So I will swim fast to there. And then now to that house, it's 1/4 kilometer. So I'll go medium speed. So I'll use landmarks instead of swimming pool walls to be able to get myself to pick up my pace or to stretch out or change my stroke. And for me, that works really well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zvika. Anybody else, please?
I have a question. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Lynne, how do you choose your crew? Do you choose it, I don't know, professional swimmers, family? How you choose them for each of your challenges?
That's a great question. And I found that it's always good to have a small crew and people who are smart, who can have a plan that can come up with at the last moment. If everything changes, they can change the plan. So they're very adaptable. I find most of the people that have been my crew are friends. Initially it was my dad was one of the crew, and then lifeguards and coach and all that. But now through the years, it's changed. Like for instance, when I swam the Beagle Channel. I had a friend who was a real estate broker who was able to operate a boat. He was good at operating a boat. I had a friend who was a fashion designer. I had a friend who was a doctor. And I had a friend who was a swimmer, but also a pilot for Alaska Airlines. So during the actual preparation for the swim, we had agreed with the Chilean Navy and the Argentine Navy that the Argentine Navy would allow the Chileans to come all the way to shore for the start of the swim. And then we go all the way back together to the Chilean shore. So the idea was to work together with both countries. At the last moment, the Chileans didn't agree to it. So suddenly my friend who was the real estate broker, used to selling properties and negotiating, was negotiating with the different officials from both countries to figure out how could I do the swim, because the Argentines were so upset because the Chileans wouldn't agree to what they initially agreed to. So what was finally decided was that we would go with the Argentine Navy halfway across the Beagle Channel and then meet the Chileans and then go with the Chileans the rest of the way to their shore for me to finish the swim. And then we come back and meet in the middle and celebrate together. And that's what we did. But it was because Barry, my friend, was a real estate broker that he could help figure out how to negotiate it all. So it doesn't make sense sometimes, like, why do you have a real estate broker? But it's more of the skills, the capability, the thinking of the people that are supporting you. And you want to make sure that, for instance, I know a swimmer who went to England to swim the English Channel, and she brought both of her parents on a boat. And both of her parents, she knew in advance, would be seasick. And I'm like, you don't have your parents go on a boat if you know they're going to be seasick, because they're going to be miserable the whole time, but you're going to be swimming and worried about them. So you make sure that during training, they are with you during your training, and you know them and you know them. And so you'll work together as a team. You don't just bring somebody in at the last minute.
Thank you.
I don't. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, please. Debbie.
So very interesting. Are you still doing long swims or just swimming because you're enjoying it?
I am swimming because I'm enjoying it, but when the world changes again and the world opens up again, if we're driving across Utah and come across a lake, I will find a way to swim across it or around it or whatever. So I train because it keeps me healthy, but if I have an opportunity to do some swim I haven't done and I can figure it out, I want to do it. So
that's inspirational, because I've just turned 60, so I can still carry on.
You can definitely carry on. I mean, one of my role models was a woman named Emma Trinkle, and she was 93 years old when I met her when she was 83 years old. And so for 10 years, I'd swim by her in the bay out here. And we would swim together a little bit at the end, and she'd have me come in and she'd play piano for me, and we'd have tea together. But she swam every day until she was 93, and then she got sick and passed away. And I have another friend now, she just turned 97 last week. So she swims out here. So I think it's not about your age, it's about your attitude and what you want to do. That's really what it's about.
Thank you. I'm hoping to attempt the Kinneret in October, so I hope it works.
That sounds fantastic. Canary Islands?
The Kinneret, the Galilee.
Oh, fantastic. I thought
the swim that you need to come and do.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, maybe someday.
We can do it in cold water.
We're still isolated here.
I know, we all
are.
are.
The beaches are open, but we're not traveling yet. But who knows?
Yeah, us too.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Lynne, before we close this session, perhaps you can explain again about the virtual book plates to the people?
Okay, so that's great. So what happens is normally as an author, you get a book and I can sign the inside of the book. But because we can't do that now, my husband came up with the idea, and we've done it now a few times for other different swimming groups. So what I can do is put to whoever you want the book dedicated to, and then sign my name. And those can be sent, scanned, or emailed to you, and then you can print it out onto a sticky label and open up the book and stick it inside the book. So that way I can remotely sign your book and commemorate this day that we've had together. So it'll have the date, and I think it'll have the swimming logo for your club, and just the attribution to you or your friend or whoever you're giving the book to or keeping.
Okay, so I remind everybody that if you want to have this sent to you, please write the details to us at the Galilee Association at the email that we wrote down here in the chat. Send us, we will collect all the names and details and then transfer it to Lynne as a full list so that she can send us back these virtual bookplates. Okay, so thank you. That's a great idea, Lynne.
Sure, actually, sometimes people want me to say something too in their book, like just keep swimming or go for the goal or whatever it is, and I'll write that in there for you.
Okay, so add this in your email to us.
Yes, thank you.
When you do that, please mention that in the email, whoever wants to have this added. So Lynne, this was so great. We want to thank you from the deep, of our hearts. It was such an inspiring talk to hear and to listen to you. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. And
Thank you.
You're a swimming legend. And this is not only because of your incredible athletic achievements, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. I hope I meet you in person sometime.
Yeah, so continue to inspire us well beyond swimming. You're making this world a better place, I can tell you.
Well, I think you probably are too, right?
We hope to see you here. You can come to swim the Galilee, the Med, the Dead, or the Red, whatever you choose.
That sounds wonderful. That sounds wonderful. Okay, so my question now is this when I would say shalom?
This is it.
Yes,
This is it,
exactly.
okay. Let me say shalom aleichem. Shalom
Shalom Aleichem.